Okay, our second presentation, Ashkan Sayedi from AMS OSRAM.
All
Ashkan,
right.
the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. I was looking at the attendee list. I see a lot of familiar names, so it's good to be in touch with everybody. Hope to see you all at ECOC in a couple of weeks or maybe months now, but it's coming up quick. So I'd like to tell you about what we're doing here at AMS to enable a lot of the future that you've heard about from both the NPO form factor perspective, and I'll talk to you about the future of wide and slow. Go to the next one for me, Daryl, please.
Yes. Oops.
Awesome. So look, I've now proudly worked at two different systems companies, leading the charge into how to build these rows and racks and chips and network them all together. And the problem statement is pretty clear. We're getting into the era of heterogeneous compute for AI inference. This means that you not only have just the GPU, there's also the LPU, your own custom ASIC, a TPU in there. You also in that row will carry your context storage. You have your traditional scale out networking and then a scale up. So it's a very busy row. That's the point. And somewhere around 60 to 70% of the interconnects that are used in a data center are within a row themselves. And especially as inference workloads and the models get to be bigger, the scale up domain definitely has a lot of benefit. There is a better performance per watt improvement on either token throughput or number of users served. And because the row is quite busy and quite dense of the different kinds of racks you have to bring in, as well as the infrastructure of power and cooling, these larger scale up domains will have to span multiple rows, 2 rows, 3, 4 rows, kind of like that. So there's a very sweet spot of the radius of around 100 to maybe 125 meters where a significant amount of interconnectivity has to happen in a data center. And single mode optics today, in many form factors that are out there, are going to struggle to meet the demand of these scale up requirements, both in cost and power because of what they add, because today that's done just with copper, as well as the latency jitter. There's a lot of important figures of merit here to make sure that in these highly synchronized, like Jeff was very well describing around how these things do the math, right? These highly synchronized traffic network data patterns required to be highly synchronized. So if you have a lot of network jitter, it's going to fall apart, which means PAM4 encoding and the forward error correction schemes that are used for that are just going to add prohibitive DSP or sorry, FEC latency and latency variability on top of that. This is why there's a huge amount of opportunity here for NRZ-based wide and slow optics that enable cost and power consumption on par with copper, as a few speakers earlier said as well. I fully agree with that. And then we can achieve basically analog-driven or pure near zero latency, including the time of flight on top of that, to be precisely deterministic, which is exactly what these kinds of connections mean. So on this picture, I've drawn a cartoon of a typical row that one would build, and the kinds of connections that could be there, meaning going from the GPU NIC card out to the scale out switch, between the switches in the scale up, meaning an L1 to L1, as well as the GPU to storage and GPU to LPU. There is a point, I didn't want to make the picture too busy, but there is a point to be set around the GPU or the accelerator to scale up switch connection. You know, in this form factor, obviously it's all copper, and that's why we have built dense racks. But as that connection becomes optics, as the accelerator to the L1 switch connection becomes optical, you have to ask yourself, do I need to build such a dense rack when I'm able to go now 50 meters or 60 meters reasonably cheaply? Then we are entering perhaps a new era of disaggregated rack design. We're not there at all today. I do want to acknowledge that from a systems perspective, even if you enable that, it is too disruptive. So this is the ecosystem where we live in right now, where for some near-term future, I think the accelerator to L1 will stay copper, but the L1 to L1 and the scale-up can be optical, like I've shown here, as well as taking the GPUs out to other hybrid or heterogeneous types of ASICs. So this really sets the stage on why you need that 100-meter reach. So go ahead, Daryl. And if you compare the link architecture, so this slide is around link architecture, and if you look at the various figures of merit here, you see that the electro-optical power efficiency, and what that means is, you know, lasers, controllers, drivers, TIAs, thermal control, whatever you need. Wide and slow, our links can easily get under 2 picojoules per bit, maybe even closer to 1 if you really optimize the fiber coupling, and the link budget of the optical channel. So, and some of the best silicon photonics at 200 gig or TFLN, EML-based 200 gig PAM4 and 400 gig PAM4 solutions that are coming are in that 3.5 to 4 pico, maybe the lower threes picojoules per bit kind of range. So there's roughly a factor of 2 savings here on the power. But that's really, and Jeff said it earlier also, he did a really good job on setting the context on the power adder and the cost adder for up versus out, because scale up has 10x the bandwidth. So cost efficiency does really matter too, because you're adding on top of what would be the accelerator and the HBM associated cost for that. So the typical fast stuff, mostly driven by the fact that you need some sort of a laser, you need some sort of a PM fiber, you're going to be sitting at around 20 cents. And I've put this one, typically I present this as $1 per gig, but since we're talking about 100T, 200T switches, and accelerators have 14T, they're moving to 28 tera, 56 tera. I felt like terabit was the right number of bandwidth in the denominator to normalize this with too. And so then this is where wide and slow can offer you that factor of 2. For sense of scale, copper today is running at around $50 per terabit. So it is conceivable that wide and slow can get down to that $100 number and maybe dip under $100 as we get volume going. And I've said this before in another role in another conference, but in these wide and slow architectures, a significant amount of the cost is associated to the fiber. But all the other supporting infrastructure, the emitters, photodetectors, ASICs, are significantly cheaper, significantly cheaper. And so, you know, a lot of conversation was had in the earlier sessions around, where do I put the laser? Do I integrate it? Do I deal with this? How do I deal with the thermals? There are no lasers because you're just directly modulating the optical source. There are no PM fibers. It's a bundle of fibers, multi-core fiber. So the cost savings at the engine level is 2x, acknowledging that a larger portion of it will be percentage-wise taken up by the fiber connector, which is an ecosystem mechanical engineering problem. But really, on the far right too is where the wide and slow architecture takes ahead, because if the thesis statement is that you need a very precise jitter, you do not want to have forward error correction, that means in the physical domain, you must achieve in the teens of error ratio. And so this is where I've compared it to a typical DSP that's out there today by the 3 leading vendors, NVIDIA, Broadcom, and perhaps Marvell, that, you know, if you're going to do full and half retime, you're in the 30 nanosecond, 60 nanosecond, maybe you're a little bit higher for half and full retime. Of course, non-retime, you're getting the straight analog throughput, but then you don't get a very good BER. So in your DSP or off into the chip, you have to do those error corrections. But however, with the wide and slow running in the NRZ domain, and Eric was talking about, you know, somewhere between the 20s to 50 gig range is probably the sweet spot. And that's a function of mechanical, how many wide you can go and what kind of CMOS node that you want to use. But running in the NRZ space then lets you run in the one of the minus 14, 15, negative 14, negative 15 BER range, which has been demonstrated many times in the past. And that helps you stay high fidelity and high throughput. So we're able to achieve cost efficiency within an arm's reach of what copper can do at 100x reach. So not 1 meter, but 100 meters. And you're able to do FEC-free. That cuts down the network latency jitter, which is critical for these systems. Go to the next one.